Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and realized they were smiling while quietly destroying your family? I never imagined the woman my father married after my mother's death would become the reason our entire family fell apart. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She simply waited. Waited until my father became too sick to defend himself. Waited until everyone trusted her. And then she tried to erase me from his life forever. But there was one person she never noticed: the old gardener who had worked on our property for nearly 30 years. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't family, but he saw everything. And what he revealed in court changed all of our lives forever. Before I tell you what happened, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. These stories are inspired by real-life family conflicts and remind us that the truth always finds its way into the light. Now, let me tell you my story. My name is Ethan Parker, and I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. For most of my childhood, life was simple. My father, Richard Parker, owned a successful construction company that had been in our family for almost 40 years. My mother, Laura, was a public school teacher who believed kindness mattered more than money. Together, they taught me two lessons I never forgot. The first: never betray your family. The second: money can disappear overnight, but your reputation follows you forever. When I was 16, my mother lost her battle with ovarian cancer. Watching her disappear piece by piece changed my father forever. He buried himself in work. The laughter vanished from our house. Birthdays became ordinary days. Christmas became another date on the calendar. For years, it was just the two of us trying to survive our grief. Then everything changed. About 4 years later, my father introduced me to a woman named Vanessa Morgan. She was elegant, confident, always perfectly dressed. She spoke softly, smiled constantly, and somehow knew exactly what everyone wanted to hear. Dad looked happier than he had in years. For the first time since Mom died, he smiled. I wanted to believe Vanessa was good for him. I truly did. She brought flowers to my mother's grave. She cooked family dinners. She even framed old photographs of my parents together and placed them around the house. Looking back now, I realized she wasn't honoring my mother's memory. She was earning our trust. Within a year, they were married. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Vanessa encouraged my father to retire early. She convinced him to travel. She suggested hiring new accountants, new lawyers, new financial advisors. She called it simplifying life. Dad believed every word. Whenever I questioned anything, he'd smile and say, "Ethan, Vanessa only wants what's best for us." Us. That word would eventually lose all meaning. I graduated from college and accepted a marketing job in Raleigh. It was only a few hours away from Charlotte, so I visited every other weekend. Every visit felt slightly different. Small things disappeared. Old family photos, my mother's favorite furniture, her piano, the handmade quilt she'd sewn before she died. Vanessa always had an explanation. The furniture looked outdated. The piano was collecting dust. The pictures needed restoration. I believed her. Until one afternoon, I walked into my father's office. It had always been his favorite room. Shelves filled with engineering books, awards from decades of business, family photographs, memories. Now everything was gone. The walls were empty. The books had disappeared. Even my childhood baseball trophy wasn't there anymore. Vanessa smiled when she saw me staring. I wanted to modernize the room. Modernize. That single word erased 40 years of history. Dad didn't even seem to notice. He simply nodded. "It looks nice." Something inside me felt wrong, not because of the office, because my father no longer sounded like himself. Over the following year, his health began to decline. At first, it was forgetfulness, then dizziness, then fatigue. Doctors diagnosed him with a rare neurological illness that slowly affected his memory and mobility. The diagnosis devastated all of us, especially Dad. He'd spent his entire life building homes. Now he struggled to climb stairs. Vanessa immediately took control. She handled medications, doctor appointments, insurance paperwork, business meetings, bank accounts, everything. Everyone praised her. "She's such a devoted wife. Richard is lucky. She's sacrificing everything." I wanted to believe them, but every time I visited, Dad seemed more isolated. If I asked to speak with him alone, Vanessa stayed nearby. If I suggested taking him out for lunch, she claimed he was too tired. If I called, she answered his phone. "He's sleeping. He's resting. He can't talk right now." Weeks turned into months. Sometimes I wouldn't hear my father's voice for 3 weeks. Whenever I complained, Vanessa acted offended. "You think I'm keeping him from you?" She laughed. "Ethan, your father needs peace, not stress." I started feeling like a visitor in my own childhood home. One Sunday afternoon, I surprised Dad by arriving without calling first. Vanessa looked genuinely shocked when she opened the door. "Oh, you should have called." I smiled politely. "I wanted to surprise Dad. He isn't feeling well. I'll only stay a few minutes." She hesitated, just for a second, then stepped aside. I found my father sitting alone on the back porch. He looked thinner than I'd ever seen him. His hands trembled slightly as he held a cup of coffee. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Ethan?" He hugged me with tears in his eyes. "I've missed you." Those 4 words shattered me. Miss me? I had called almost every week. We sat together for nearly an hour. Dad spoke slowly. Sometimes he forgot words. Sometimes he repeated stories. But then his expression suddenly changed. He looked over both shoulders to make sure nobody was listening. Then he leaned toward me. "Ethan," his voice barely rose above a whisper. "I need to tell you something." "What is it, Dad?" He swallowed hard. "I've updated my will." I nodded. "Okay. It's important." "I made sure everything is fair." I smiled. "I don't care about money." He grabbed my wrist. "No, you have to understand. I wrote everything down. I don't want anyone changing my wishes." Before I could ask another question, Vanessa appeared through the patio door. Her smile disappeared the moment she saw us talking privately. "There you are." She walked over carrying a tray of medication. "Richard, it's time for your pills." Dad immediately fell silent. His hand slowly released my wrist. Vanessa looked directly into my eyes. "What were you two discussing?" Dad answered before I could. "Nothing important." She smiled. "Good." Then she handed him the pills and watched until he swallowed every single one. I couldn't explain why, but for the first time in my life, I felt afraid inside my own father's house. I had no idea that conversation about his will would be the last honest conversation my father and I would ever have. Because within weeks Vanessa would make sure no one could hear his wishes again, and the only person who noticed what she was hiding was the quiet old gardener everyone believed was invisible. I pulled my car onto the shoulder of the highway. My hands were shaking. I unfolded the note again. "Your father hid it downstairs. Hurry." The brass key looked old, far older than the modern locks installed throughout the house. I immediately knew what downstairs meant. There was an old basement beneath the original part of the house. Most people didn't even know it existed. When my grandfather built the property in the 1960s, he included a storm shelter that later became a storage room. As a child, I used to play there with my father. We called it the vault. It held old family photographs, military medals, tax records, and things too valuable to throw away but too sentimental to display. Only 3 people had ever owned keys. My grandfather, my father, and apparently Sam. I couldn't risk walking through the front door. If Vanessa saw me, she'd never let me near that basement, so I waited. Just after sunset, the estate became quiet. Kitchen lights dimmed. The upstairs bedroom light came on. I parked 2 streets away and slipped through the backyard fence I'd climbed hundreds of times as a teenager. Nothing had changed. The old maple tree was still there. The stone pathway my mother designed still led to the garden. Even the porch swing where my parents drank coffee every Sunday remained untouched. Only now, the house felt empty, not physically, emotionally. It no longer carried warmth, it carried fear. The basement entrance was hidden behind the detached garage. A weathered wooden door sat almost flush with the ground. Most visitors assumed it was just an old storage shed. I brushed away years of leaves. The lock stared back at me. Slowly, I inserted the brass key. Click. It turned perfectly. The heavy door creaked open. A cool rush of damp air drifted upward. I switched on my phone's flashlight and carefully climbed the narrow stairs. Dust floated through the beam of light. Everything smelled exactly as I remembered. Old wood, metal shelves, cardboard boxes, memories. My father's workbench still stood in the corner. His toolbox rested exactly where he'd left it years earlier. Beside it hung an old sign he loved. "Character is what you do when nobody is watching." I smiled despite everything. That was my father. Then I noticed something different. One section of shelving looked newer than the rest. Fresh screws, cleaner wood. Someone had moved it recently. I pushed against the shelf. Nothing. Then I remembered. Dad had once shown me a hidden latch. He'd laughed and said, "Every house deserves one good secret." I reached underneath. My fingers found a small metal lever. Click. The shelving slowly swung outward. Behind it, a wall safe. My heartbeat echoed through the room. The brass key didn't fit the safe. Of course it didn't. Dad always believed in backup security. I stared at the keypad. 4 digits. What would he choose? Mom's birthday? Mine? The year he started the company? I tried several combinations. Nothing. Then I remembered something he'd always told me. The most important day of my life wasn't the day I got married. It was the day you were born. I entered my birthday. The safe unlocked. Inside were several neatly organized folders, a small leather notebook, a flash drive, and a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Ethan, only if something happens to me." My chest tightened. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The date was only 3 months old. "Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. I hope I'm only being paranoid. But lately, I no longer know who I can trust. If I begin losing my memory, promise me you won't believe everything people say about me. Especially if those people claim to speak on my behalf." My eyes filled with tears. The handwriting became shakier. "I've changed my will. I've left detailed instructions with my attorney. Everything has been arranged fairly. If anyone tells you I changed my mind afterward, they're lying." I stopped breathing. Dad had known. He had expected someone to interfere. The final sentence nearly broke me. "Son, I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner. Love always, Dad." I wiped my eyes and reached for the flash drive. Just then a loud bang echoed above me. Someone had entered the garage. Footsteps, heavy footsteps. They were getting closer. I quickly shoved everything into my backpack. The basement door suddenly slammed shut. Darkness. Then I heard Vanessa's voice. "I know someone's down here." My heart pounded so loudly I was certain she could hear it. She walked slowly across the garage floor. Each step echoed above my head. Another voice joined hers, a man. I didn't recognize him. "Are you sure?" I saw movement. "What if it's Ethan?" There was a long silence. Then the man laughed. "If he finds anything," Vanessa answered coldly, "he won't have time to use it." Every muscle in my body froze. For the first time I realized this wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. Whatever Vanessa was hiding, she was willing to do almost anything to keep it buried. The footsteps stopped directly above the basement entrance. Someone grabbed the handle. It slowly began to turn. The basement door creaked. Slowly, painfully. Every instinct told me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The basement had only one exit. If Vanessa opened that door, she would find me. I glanced around the room, desperately searching for another way out. Then I remembered. Years ago, my grandfather had installed an emergency tunnel leading to the old greenhouse. Dad once joked it was built for tornadoes, but we used it as kids to play secret agents. I hadn't thought about it in nearly 20 years. I dropped to one knee and pulled away an old canvas tarp lying in the corner. Underneath was a rusted metal hatch. "Please still work," I whispered. Behind me, the basement door opened another inch. Vanessa's voice echoed down the staircase. "I know you're down there." The man with her switched on a flashlight. Its beam swept across the ceiling. I pulled the hatch open. The hinges groaned, just enough space to crawl through. I slid inside and quietly lowered the hatch behind me. The tunnel was narrow, damp, and almost completely dark. I crawled on my hands and knees, my backpack scraping against the dirt walls. Behind me, I heard footsteps entering the basement. Boxes were being moved. Shelves slammed against the walls. Vanessa was searching. Then I heard her scream. "The safe!" A few seconds later, no. The sound of papers being thrown filled the basement. "He's got it." My pulse exploded. She knew. She knew I'd found the hidden documents. "Find him," she shouted. "I don't care how." I crawled nearly 50 yards before reaching the tunnel's exit beneath the greenhouse. Fresh air rushed into my lungs as I climbed outside. I didn't stop. I sprinted across neighboring properties until I reached my car. Only after locking every door did I finally breathe again. Back at my apartment in Raleigh, I spread everything across my kitchen table. The letter, the leather notebook, the flash drive, several folders. One folder contained copies of my father's original will. Another contained updated financial statements. Everything looked legitimate. Then I opened the leather notebook. It wasn't a diary, it was a journal. Dad had written short entries almost every day after his diagnosis. The first few pages were hopeful. "Vanessa has been wonderful. Physical therapy went well. I think I'll recover." But gradually the entries changed. April 12th. "Vanessa insists on managing every appointment. I appreciate the help, but I miss making my own decisions. May 3rd. She fired Karen, my longtime assistant, said we needed younger employees. I wasn't asked. May 28th. My bank statements look different. I don't remember approving these transfers. My stomach tightened. Each page became darker. Then one sentence nearly made me drop the notebook. June 14th. Today I signed papers I wasn't allowed to read. I immediately plugged the flash drive into my laptop. Several folders appeared, family photos, scanned legal documents, medical records. Then one file simply labeled video. I clicked it. The recording showed my father's office. The date stamp was 6 weeks earlier. Dad sat at his desk. He looked weak, but alert. Across from him sat an older man in a navy suit. I recognized him immediately. David Collins, our family's attorney for over 25 years. The video had no dramatic music, no editing, just two men talking. Dad looked directly into the camera. If anyone is watching this, he paused. It means I was right to be worried. Mr. Collins nodded silently. Dad continued. I am creating this recording because I believe someone may attempt to interfere with my estate after I lose the ability to speak for myself. My hands began shaking. He looked straight into the lens. Ethan, if this reaches you, I love you. And everything written in my will reflects my own decisions. No one pressured me. No one threatened me. No one has permission to change it. Then he looked toward the attorney. David, if anything happens to me. Protect my son. The video ended. I sat frozen. Dad had known. He'd planned for exactly this situation. The next morning, I drove straight to David Collins' law office. The receptionist looked surprised. Mr. Collins retired 3 weeks ago. What? He sold the practice. My heart sank. Do you know where I can find him? She hesitated. I probably shouldn't. Then she quietly wrote an address on a sticky note. He asked us to give you this if you ever came. I stared at her. He knew I'd come? She smiled sadly. He said eventually you would. An hour later, I pulled into a quiet neighborhood outside Charlotte. Mr. Collins opened the front door before I even knocked. Ethan. He looked relieved. I've been expecting you. You knew, he nodded. Your father prepared for this. I handed him the envelope and flash drive. He carefully examined them, then he looked up. Good. They're still intact. What do you mean? He motioned for me to sit. Richard believed someone inside the house was trying to isolate him. He told me he no longer trusted Vanessa. My chest tightened. So why didn't you stop her? His expression darkened. I tried. He opened a desk drawer and removed several legal documents. I refused to change your father's will after he became medically impaired. What happened? The following week, he sighed. I was informed that Vanessa had hired another attorney. My stomach dropped. She said Richard wanted to rewrite everything. But he couldn't legally do that. Exactly. Mr. Collins leaned closer. Which is why I've spent the last month trying to find proof. I slowly placed the journal on his desk. What about this? He opened it. After reading only 3 pages, his face lost all color. This changes everything. Just then his cell phone rang. He answered, didn't speak, only listened. Then his expression became serious. After hanging up, he looked directly at me. Ethan, that was the hospital. My heart stopped. My father, Mr. Collins nodded. Richard's condition suddenly worsened this morning. He asked for you. I stood so quickly my chair fell backward. But there's something else. What? He took a slow breath. Vanessa has already arrived. And according to the nurse, she's demanding that no one else be allowed into his room. I didn't wait another second. Mr. Collins grabbed his coat, locked the office, and we drove toward Charlotte Memorial Hospital in complete silence. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every minute mattered. As we pulled into the emergency entrance, I prayed I wasn't too late. The intensive care unit was crowded. Doctors hurried through the hallways. Nurses pushed medication carts from room to room. At the reception desk, I gave my father's name. The nurse looked at her computer. Then her expression changed. I'm sorry, only immediate family is allowed. I am immediate family. Before she could answer, a familiar voice interrupted. No, Vanessa. She walked toward us wearing an expensive black blazer, carrying a leather folder, her eyes locked onto mine. You've upset Richard enough. He doesn't need any more stress. I stepped closer. I'm seeing my father. She folded her arms. He specifically requested privacy. Mr. Collins calmly spoke. I'd like to hear Mr. Parker say that himself. Vanessa's smile disappeared. You're retired. You have no authority here. And you, she said, pointing at me, need to accept reality. I looked directly into her eyes. My father asked for me, she laughed. He barely remembers his own name. The words hit me like a punch. Before I could answer, the ICU door opened. A nurse stepped outside. Is Ethan Parker here? I am, she smiled gently. Your father has been asking for you all morning. Vanessa's face turned pale. That's impossible. The nurse frowned. He specifically said she checked her notes. Please bring my son Ethan before it's too late. Without another word, I walked past Vanessa. For the first time, she couldn't stop me. My father looked weaker than I'd ever seen him. Machines surrounded his bed. His breathing was slow. His skin was pale. But when he saw me, he smiled. A real smile. Ethan, I held his hand. I'm here, Dad. He squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. I knew you'd come. Tears filled my eyes. You don't have to talk. He slowly shook his head. I don't have much time. I leaned closer. He whispered carefully between breaths. I'm sorry for everything. You have nothing to apologize for. He closed his eyes, then opened them again. Vanessa isn't who I thought. I nodded. I know. His breathing became uneven. The will, it's not the only thing. What do you mean? His eyes searched the room. Then he whispered just loudly enough for me to hear. Ask Sam, the gardener, he knows. Before I could ask another question, the heart monitor suddenly accelerated. Doctors rushed inside. Nurse, we need everyone out. Someone gently pulled me away from the bed. The last thing I heard my father say was, I love you. The doors closed. I stood frozen in the hallway. 20 minutes later, the doctor walked toward me. His face said everything before he spoke. I'm very sorry. Mr. Richard Parker passed away peacefully. My father was gone. The funeral took place 4 days later. Hundreds of people attended. Former employees, neighbors, friends, veterans, even competitors from the construction industry. Everyone respected Richard Parker. Vanessa stood at the front wearing black sunglasses. She cried at exactly the right moments. She hugged every guest. She looked like the perfect grieving widow, but something felt rehearsed. After the service, people slowly began leaving. I remained near my father's grave. Eventually, someone stood beside me. Sam, the old gardener, removed his cap. I miss him already. So do I. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he reached into his jacket. I think it's time. He handed me a small sealed envelope. Across the front were 4 handwritten words. Only after my funeral. It was my father's handwriting. Inside was a folded letter, but something else slipped out. A tiny memory card, the kind used in security cameras. I looked at Sam. What is this? He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Your daddy asked me to hide it. When? About 2 months ago. My heart raced. He told me, if anything happened to him, I was to give it only to you. That evening, I inserted the memory card into my laptop. There was only one file. It was recorded by a hidden security camera inside my father's home office. The date 3 weeks before he died. The video began normally. Dad sat reviewing paperwork. Minutes later, Vanessa entered carrying tea. She smiled, set the cup on his desk, then handed him several legal documents. Dad adjusted his glasses. I'd like to read these first. Vanessa's smile faded. They're exactly what we discussed. I still want to read them. She sighed impatiently. Richard, you trust me, don't you? I do. Then sign. He hesitated. I'll have David Collins review them. The temperature in the room changed instantly. Vanessa slammed her hand on the desk. No, Dad looked surprised. I said, I want David to see them. She leaned closer. If David sees those papers, everything we've planned falls apart. My heart stopped. Dad slowly pushed the documents away. I'm not signing anything today. Vanessa stared at him for several long seconds. Then she quietly gathered the papers. But before leaving, she whispered something the camera barely captured. You'll sign them, one way or another. The video ended. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was evidence. Real evidence. The next morning, I drove straight to Mr. Collins' house. He watched the footage twice. Then a third time. When it ended, he looked directly at me. This is coercion. And depending on what those papers were, it could also be fraud. What do we do now? He didn't hesitate. We take this to the police. Just as he reached for his phone, someone knocked loudly on the front door. 3 hard knocks. We looked at each other. Mr. Collins slowly opened the door. Standing outside were 2 detectives. One of them held a file. Mr. Collins? Yes, we're investigating a complaint filed this morning. What complaint? The detective looked at me. It concerns the alleged theft of Richard Parker's original will. Then he added something that made my blood run cold. The complaint was filed by Vanessa Parker. The detectives stood quietly on Mr. Collins' front porch. Neither of them looked hostile, but their expressions were serious. "Mr. Ethan Parker?" one of them asked. "Yes, I'm Detective Daniel Harris." He opened the file in his hands. "This morning, Mrs. Vanessa Parker reported that you unlawfully entered your father's residence and stole confidential legal documents, including his original will." I almost laughed. "The will belongs to my father." "It belonged to your father," Vanessa's voice suddenly interrupted. We turned around. She stepped out of a black luxury SUV parked across the street. She wasn't alone. A younger attorney followed behind her carrying a briefcase. Vanessa removed her sunglasses and smiled. "There he is. The thief." I clenched my fists. "You know that's a lie," she shrugged. "Then prove it." Mr. Collins calmly stepped forward. "Detective, before you make any conclusions, I'd like you to watch something." He handed over the memory card. "And this flash drive?" The detective frowned. "What are these?" "Evidence." The detectives exchanged a glance. "We'll review everything." Vanessa crossed her arms. "Those files were stolen." Mr. Collins smiled. "Actually, they were voluntarily recorded by Richard Parker." For the first time, Vanessa looked nervous. 3 days later, the detectives asked everyone to appear at the Charlotte Police Department. They had finished reviewing the videos. The journal, the financial records, the hidden letter, the original will. The detective placed a thick folder on the conference table. "Mrs. Parker, we have several questions." Vanessa remained confident. "I've done nothing wrong." Detective Harris slid several bank statements across the table. "Can you explain these transfers?" She barely looked at them. "My husband approved every payment." Then another detective placed enlarged signature samples beside the statements. "According to 2 independent handwriting experts, many of these signatures are not authentic." The room fell silent. Vanessa's attorney quickly interrupted. "My client denies any forgery." Detective Harris nodded. "We expected that." Then he pressed a button on the television mounted on the wall. My father's hidden office recording began playing. The room watched in complete silence as Vanessa pressured Dad to sign documents. When the recording ended, nobody spoke. Her attorney slowly closed his notebook, but Detective Harris wasn't finished. "We also located something else." He opened another evidence envelope. Inside was a tiny digital recorder. This was recovered from Mr. Parker's bedroom. Vanessa's face instantly lost its color. "I've never seen that." Detective Harris pressed play. The recording started with ordinary conversation. Then my father's voice became clear. "Vanessa, I won't change the will." Her voice answered immediately. "You don't have a choice. I'm leaving everything exactly as planned." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Then the recording captured something that stunned everyone. Vanessa whispered, "If Ethan inherits this company, he'll eventually discover what I already did." The detective stopped the recording. He looked directly at Vanessa. "What exactly did you mean by that?" She said nothing. The investigation expanded immediately. Financial investigators spent weeks examining company accounts. Hidden transactions began appearing: unauthorized property sales, fake consulting invoices, personal expenses charged to the business. By the end of the audit, more than $2.8 million had disappeared over 2 years. The money hadn't vanished. It had been transferred into shell companies secretly controlled by Vanessa and her younger brother. The inheritance had never been her real goal. She'd already been stealing from my father while he was still alive. The will was simply the final piece of her plan. 6 months later, the civil and criminal cases began. The courtroom was filled with reporters, former employees, family friends, curious members of the public. Everyone wanted answers. Vanessa entered wearing an expensive gray suit. She looked calm, confident, as though she still believed she could talk her way out of everything. The prosecution presented weeks of evidence. The videos, the journal, the forged signatures, the financial records, medical testimony showing my father remained mentally capable when he signed his true will. One witness after another confirmed the same pattern: isolation, control, manipulation, financial abuse. Still, Vanessa denied every accusation. Then the prosecutor said words I'll never forget. "The state calls Samuel Brooks." The courtroom doors opened. The old gardener slowly walked toward the witness stand, wearing his cleanest suit. Holding his weathered cap in both hands, many people barely recognized him. To most, he was simply the gardener. To my father, he had been family. After taking the oath, Sam quietly looked around the courtroom. Then his eyes met mine. He nodded, almost like he was telling me everything would be okay. The prosecutor smiled gently. "Mr. Brooks, how long did you work for Richard Parker?" 32 years. "And during that time, how often did you see Mrs. Parker?" "Nearly every day." The prosecutor paused. "Did you ever witness anything unusual?" Sam took a deep breath. "Yes. What did you see?" The courtroom became completely silent. "I saw Mr. Parker cry." Several jurors looked up. Sam continued. "I'd never seen that man cry. Not when his business nearly failed. Not when storms destroyed our projects. Not even when he buried his wife. But one evening, I found him sitting alone in the garden. He told me, 'Sam, I think I married the wrong person.'" Vanessa looked away. The prosecutor asked one final question. "Mr. Brooks, why did Richard Parker trust you with the hidden evidence?" Sam smiled sadly. "Because I wasn't just his gardener." The courtroom waited. "My father built this company with Richard." Gasps spread through the gallery. Sam continued. "When my father died, Richard promised he'd always look after me. We weren't related by blood, but we were brothers in every way that mattered." He reached into his pocket and held up an old photograph. It showed two young men standing beside the first truck the construction company ever owned, Richard Parker and Sam's father. "He trusted me because I never wanted his money. I only wanted to protect my friend." The jury didn't deliberate for long, just 4 hours. When they returned, the courtroom stood. The foreperson unfolded the verdict. On the charge of fraud, guilty. Forgery, guilty. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, guilty. Attempted interference with a legal will, guilty. Vanessa slowly lowered her head. The judge spoke firmly. "Mrs. Parker, this court finds your actions were calculated, cruel, and motivated by greed. You manipulated a seriously ill man, isolated him from his family, and attempted to profit from his declining health. You are hereby sentenced according to the law." As deputies placed handcuffs around her wrists, she looked at me one last time. There was no apology, no tears, only regret that she'd been caught. Several months later, my father's original will was officially recognized by the probate court. His final wishes were honored exactly as he had written them. The stolen money that investigators recovered was returned to the company. I didn't sell the business. Instead, I rebuilt it. The first thing I did was rename our employee scholarship program after my mother, Laura Parker. The second, I invited Sam to my office. I handed him a small envelope. Inside was the deed to a beautiful cottage on the edge of the property he'd cared for most of his life. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I can't accept this," I smiled. "My father would have insisted." Sam hugged me tightly. For the first time since losing Dad, the estate finally felt like home again. I still visit my parents' graves every Sunday morning. Sometimes I bring fresh flowers. Sometimes I simply sit in silence. And every time I leave, I remember the lesson my father spent his life teaching me. Greed may hide behind a smile for a while, but the truth has a way of finding the light.